Welcome to my channel Limelight Leaks. Please share and subscribe and hit the bell icon for new updates. Daughter of Leslie Hackman's trial, Gene Hackman, the great actor, has reached a pivotal juncture following fortnights of stillness and competing statements that Leslie has made public that are vital facts regarding the unexplained demises of Gene Hackman, her mother, and Betsy Arakawa's speech had a profound impact on Courtroom, as well as the general startled by the long-concealed reality from when the inquiry first started. The judge and the cops observed numerous suspicious circumstances surrounding the demise of Arakawa, Betsy, and Hackman. Indeed in a suspicious. So yet, there have been no indications of violence, a lack of adequately explanatory natural causes, their demises, while the spotlight was on as the only inheritor in the matter of Leslie Hackman. On multiple occasions, Gene Hackman altered her assertions at first. She was adamant that it was a natural death for her parents. On the other hand, when faced with legal pressure, combined with recently surfaced proof that Leslie was at last compelled to reveal alarming, most recent forensic reports' secrets exposed a startling reality. Betsy Arakawa perished as a result of a rare sickness that was passed down. As soon as this revelation is made by rodents, shocked doctors and scientists, because of illness is incredibly uncommon in the United States, most notably in affluent areas, such as an instance in which Gene Hackman's spouse lived a specialist from the Control of Diseases, CDC. Let your shock at this illness almost, for whatever reason, never shows up in those places, to get it without knowing, coming into contact with an infectious agent, is extremely. Mysterious unease intensified as authorities turned up that Betsy Arakawa had been wholly alone during her dying days, with nobody came to see her, and she had no medical documentation demonstrating her attendance at visit the doctor often and received calls from, no response from her primary care physician. Delivery people themselves verified that it was unusual for Hackman House to welcome guests. The subject emerged. What if Ality, residing in an opulent estate with completely cut off from the natural world, enter into such an unusual sick person? Did someone purposefully infect Hackman with the virus location, or was it only a remarkable randomness? When confronted with legal questions, at long last, Leslie Hackman spoke up. In the weeks leading up to her confession, she did accept fatalities of Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa. She had paid them multiple visits. Nevertheless, she maintained that she was not responsibility for their demise. But important fact revealed eyewitnesses was informed that they saw Leslie with enigmatic container into her parents' house a few days prior to their demise. When questioned, refusing to discuss the contents, Leslie responded solely by saying that a family presented with what prompted additional mistrust was the time that followed Betsy and Gene Hackman. Arakawa passed away, and the box was MIA, located in the residence. The prosecution contended that this container may hold the secret to deciphering the full case. May it have included a poisonous material or some other that caused Betsy's uncommon illness. Arakawa immediately became ill as a result of this instance, gained widespread attention in the media, likened it to the most well-known, perplexing cases like the fatalities of accessible online. Marilyn Monroe, Natalie Wood. People in the community came up with ideas, all the way to a plot involving Gene Hackman had introduced his wife to the idea of that the real reason Leslie Hackman was involved was things were not yet made public. Views differed. Some held the view that the fact that Hackman fell prey to this personal tragedy, while some people thought her involvement with her parents was direct fatalities. The reality remained murky, but in light of the mounting, more alarming evidence, discoveries were inevitable during the trial on, and detectives toiled relentlessly in their pursuit of the ultimate reality, belonged to Betsy Arakawa and Gene Hackman. Tragically coincidental demise. Alternatively, did someone secretly conspire to? It was the most pressing concern. The question of what Leslie Hackman concealing, and would the courts deliver the facts in Hollywood's enigmatic demise? Gene Hackman, a legend, and his wife Jean Togental. Reminder to remain updated. New information in this riveting case. My dear Mrs. Leslie Hackman, under penalty of perjury, and that words spoken by you in court will have the same kept as proof. Leslie Hackman. Yes, completely comprehend, Your Honor. Prosecutor, could you kindly clarify the discrepancies in your earlier claims? You asserted that during the incident's nighttime, you were present at home by themselves, although there is evidence that when leaving your residence at approximately 1 p.m. The voice of Leslie Hackman, modicum quaking with fear. I genuinely can't place. It was on that very night that I went out for a period, however brief. Prosecutor, the question becomes, when you make your way back to the mansion, coming home at first light, is there anything on your mind? Attempting to conceal. Defense lawyer. Objection. The prosecution is proactively putting the witness's objection in jeopardy long term. But Mrs. Leslie, could you please elaborate? Excuse me, Leslie Hackman, for your tardy return. Briefly mute before letting out a sigh. I went to visit a friend. There is nothing to hide. Hence I avoided discussing the state of my parents' health. Prefer that no one be aware of this because I experienced remorseful for the neglect of the maternity. But are you aware that while you were away from your mother, Betsy Arakawi, passed away from enigmatic situations, and that your sad news, Gene Hackman, our father, has passed away? When Leslie Hackman, I had no idea that I must have recalled that when returning home, looked like a typical prosecutor. Are you certain? I can confirm from the forensic report that your mom passed away due to an uncommon illness disease spread by rats. But you still have to. No symptoms of neglect could be seen in the parents' mansion. Rat or animal species fails to, which, Leslie Hackman, appear peculiar to you. She hides her mouth and looks at you with wide eyes, claiming that this was done intentionally. No charges have been filed. Prosecutor. Final decisions. However, it is important that, if you had any involvement whatsoever, and I have a crucial question. Who was the only witness to Gene Hackman's survival? My apologies. But Leslie Hackman seems hesitant. Upon my return home, I failed to see my father. The atmosphere in the courtroom became increasingly charged as each individual experienced growing anxiety, like though the reality was about town covering the true culprit. This was Leslie, who was still keeping an atmosphere that permeates the courtroom, narrowed their focus to Leslie Hackman, the sole offspring of Gene Arakawa, Hackman, and Betsy. Her relentless interrogation as a prosecutor seems to become anxious, and her grip becomes shaky. Firmly held hand in hand. Fraudster Leslie, I will inquire once more about was the final witness to Gene Hackman's disappearance. Lee gulped hard, taking a deep breath. Taking a long breath, she raised her head with a trembling voice, but unwavering. Leslie, it was me, Hackman. I was the very last individual to witness my dad. A flurry of whispers reached several members of the jury, spoke in hushed tones, while the prosecution hurriedly took notes on the defense. The defense counsel wasted no time arguing. Lady Leslie, attorney, please keep your cool. Would you be able to specify when was the last time Leslie, your father, shut her eyes? Looks for an instant as though attempting to decipher, sharing her recollections upon releasing. She started to tell Leslie's story to them that evening. When I returned home, I was around 1 minute first thing. As I entered my father's investigating, I noticed that he was still wide awake, was jotting down some notes on a scrap of the document from my recollection of the time into the room. He gave me a glance that seemed perplexed. He whispered, "When are you coming back?" Discussion between the prosecutor and Leslie. Breaking voice of the Hackman. I am unsure of. Never had the opportunity to inquire since he proceeded. Betsy, placing her in risk. I failed to fully get his point, but he appeared quite anxious. He went on to say that our home had been broken into previously. Unbeknownst to him, this witness's testimony shook the courtroom to its core. Are you claiming, Judge, that there was an intrusion? Suspect Leslie Hackman acknowledges with a nod. I am uncertain, but my dad was sure that an observer was looking, in addition to claiming that my mom had been often fell ill but stubbornly refused to report to the medical facility where his suspicions were. There was not. Okay. Prosecutor, could you please proceed with Mrs. A. Long breath was taken by Leslie before continue with Leslie P. Mann. While I was dismissed his claims, assuming he was simply concerning himself excessively, yet he gazed at me when asked if they were serious. Check the safe in case anything were to happen to me. Did you, prosecutor, find that to be the sole clue? Verify the secure. Leslie chewed on her lip and Leslie Hackman nodded, and I made an effort to open it. Subsequent to my father's death, and it was, courtroom sank into a hushed stillness as Leslie's evidence further shrouded the case in mystery, higher than before. Our case, prosecutor. We have proof that someone broke into Gene Hackman's safe not long ago, only a day prior to law enforcement's arrival. For are you aware of who was responsible for that? Despite Leslie's denial, her face made evident regarding the defense attorney before you. This proves one thing, that outside the case, an individual entered the Hackman's house and seized vital records that Mr. Hackman possessed. Nothing for my client to do once I departed, alongside her parents' charges with murder. But does Mrs. Leslie find out what was in those papers? After a brief period of silence, Leslie whispered to Leslie, I could be wrong, but I believe it was Hackman. Long ago, clandestine information that my dad had held a cover-up that may have endangered his and is my mother in jeopardy, Judge. Have you any idea what this secret is, Leslie? Leslie spoke gently as she bowed her head before he passed away. My father was a Hackman, brought up a by name. Who is that Morrison? I have no idea. At once after the prosecution and the attorneys for the defense locked eyes, the concealment of something. Far larger, honorable prosecutor, I humbly beseech you to call upon more eyewitnesses and look into the moniker. I think this might be the key, Morrison. Regarding the investigation of Gene Hackman's murder and Betsy was Arawak, the court is now in recess. Nonetheless, the stress was still more than the enigma surrounding this case had been fair from finished following the break. The mood in the courtroom turned level. The intensity of Morrison's name, when Leslie Hackman had made a radical change, the case's progression, got it that if this individual turned up, the real story of Betsy and Gene Hackman an end may be in sight for Arakawa's demise. Revealed, the judge walked right in on everyone, remained on trial. Soon after resumed, the prosecutor began speaking. A prosecutor, during a critical inquiry after Mrs. Leslie. The testimony of Hackman has been found to contain essential lead that we would like to offer it. Just outside of the courtroom as expected, a fresh eyewitness stepped forward, man in his middle years. Hair, beginning to gray, he seemed composed as he wore a black suit. Still, an unintelligible expression lingered in his gaze. Accuser, could you kindly reveal who you are? James is my name and I am the court witness. Morrison, I was formerly employed by Gene Hackman. A shockwave that swept throughout the personal injury, as Morrison's name was passed around the courtroom, had emerged just in front of everyone's eyes. Mr. Morrison, the prosecutor, are you aware justification for your presence here today? I am Morrison as far as I can tell. It's due to Gene Hackman brought up my name just before he passed away, and maybe it was because he had maintained forms that nobody desired to fill out, revealed the courtroom mutterings. Judge pounded the gavel as the noise level increased. A judge's order in court can allow prosecutors to, you provide further details in these papers. With a sigh, Morrison nodded to Gene Morrison. I was asked by Hackman to create a new will, but he wished to alter it, but nobody was aware of it. All of his assets, leaving his relatives and moving all of the contents into mystery. The courtroom went into a gasp of faith. A flush developed on Leslie Hackman's cheeks. Judge, are you claiming that Gene Hackman made a last-minute amendment to his will? Morrison, you are correct, and in that case I shall vital if I were to pass away, he said, out of nowhere. It's not due to random chance that he was haunted by a vision regarding an upcoming event. As the air grew frigid, individuals started engaging in questionable stares. At defense lawyer Mr. Morrison, if a will like this is going to be Morrison, why has no one noticed that it exists? Morrison, I inserted it while grinning slightly. An assured venue. But prior to delivering it, in the event that an intruder broke into my burglarized the workplace and made off with all relevant paperwork, a new series of shocks shook the officer of the law. Are you concerned about whoever was responsible for this? Morrison continued, fell silent, and fixed his gaze squarely on Leslie. My knowledge of Hackman Morrison is limited evidence, but I am aware of the beneficiaries, the most important parts, of those papers vanishing into thin air. All gazes shifted to Leslie. My name is Leslie Hackman. Are you claiming that I miss Morrison? I am completely unaware of her, Leslie. You were the very last individual I ever saw. You were informed about the safe by Gene Hackman, did he not? However, upon opening it, it was bare. So who picked up the papers at random, intruder or the person closest to him? Despite her clenched fists, Leslie said, absolutely nothing, honorable prosecutor. This is what we are witnessing. This conflict involves more than just inheritance, has been well planned. The courtroom erupted once during the murder case. Once more, this case's theoretical foundation was crumbling piece by piece. But who's underlying it all? The ambiance within. Leslie found herself stifled in the courtroom. Even though she was cornered, Hackman attempted to maintain composure as the judge highlighted. The attorney to proceed with attorney Mrs. Do you really not know about Gene, Leslie? The security of Hackman's home made Leslie choke on her, cautiously adjusting my gaze. Leslie Hackman II, it's undeniable. My dad brought up the subject, locked, but I never accessed it because I lacked the necessary key, principal prosecutor. In fact, but in accordance with, as we are going to introduce you to a witness, spent the evening in your father's office. Just before he passed away, the whole courtroom was taken aback. The prosecutor gestured for an individual to approach a middle-aged lady, taking a stern stance advanced. Accused person, may you kindly present yourself? My name is Martha Lewis, and I was a witness to the housekeeper for the Hackman household for 15 years, a long-time attorney, Mrs. Lewis. Are you able to describe what you witnessed that evening, Martha? Martha nodded, her voice steady, yet determined. My memory of that night is crystal clear. Lewis approx 11:00 p.m. A peculiar noise, anything rumbling from Mr. Hackman's workplace. It neared the entrance and glanced inside. Miss Leslie's attempt to open the gap. Leslie, who had been feeling safe, became pale. I was never there, Hackman. You're telling a lie. Seeing you, Martha Lewis, I am not exaggerating. Evidently, when I pounded on your door, were terrified and quickly bolted for the safety. The prosecutor stepped backwards a little with regard to Leslie. Accuser, Mrs. Leslie. You stated that lacks the key to the safe, but in the event that you failed to do so, then why did you attempt to open? Leslie, what were you hoping to find? Her lip visibly struggling with an internal dispute resolution lawyer. Dispute that the evidence provided by the witness, just a note. There is absolutely nothing, tangible proof that my customer, a judge's objection to something unlawful, maintained, although I would prefer that Mrs. Leslie tell me what you were up to at the time, that evening in the office of your father. Leslie tightened her grip on her hands and then out of nowhere, Leslie Hackman moaned. The courtroom collapsed. I'll admit that. Plunged into a tense stillness. Leslie Hackman, even though I wasn't. I was in the office of my father, the individual who, upon my arrival, opened the safe. Morrison found that it was already open. Morrison squinted his eyes and opened it. Leslie bit her lip just before you softly. I don't know, Leslie Hackman said. Yet, within it all there was that, what was it, Leslie, that astonished me as a prosecutor? My father's crimson envelope from Hackman. The front bore the writer's signature, only available for my full absence. Shocked silence filled the courtroom. Advocate, may I inquire as to the whereabouts of the envelope? Leslie Hackman shook her head in disagreement. You're claiming, prosecutor, that you noticed it, but chose not to use it. Leslie Hackman, prior to this opportunity, I was unable to. I could feel its rough texture as soon as I caught wind of an incoming commotion outside. Distraught, I departed without delay. Morrison drew his arms about his chest, his eyes tight. Morrison, were you able to spot anyone else in the workplace? Leslie paused briefly, subtly brought up Leslie Hackman's name, stood before the judge who Leslie. The stepmother Betsy, Hackman Arakawa, caused a convulsion in the courtroom. Are you asserting, prosecutor, that Betsy was that evening? Leslie gave a subtle nod. I am unsure of the exact time she entered. Hackman left the office, but I caught a glimpse of her, while I stand in the corridor, inches from my door of my father. Have you spoken to her, Morrison? Leslie rejected Leslie Hackman's offer at the time. When she beheld me, she remained motionless, staring. As she stared at me, her eyes taking on an almost. Whenever her fears surfaced, they exchanged a brief look with the prosecutor. His aide redirected his attention to less fraud investigator Mrs. Leslie. This is an important advancement. If Betsy truly was present, then it's possible that she had some insight to the red envelope. But the mystery is, what caused her sudden demise? The inquiry followed by an unsettling quietness pervaded the courtroom, as Betsy Aria had knowledge that she didn't have a required to do, and has anyone chosen to still her voice, the judge's court has postponed indefinitely. We shall keep digging into these fresh new trends.